What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and in today's episode of the third person and action RPG tutorial series, we are going to be going over the initial setup of the quest menu. So we've done a lot with quests in this series, but one thing we haven't done is actually display them in a uniform location. So we always had them up in the HUD here where we could read the title and the description as well as the objectives, but this is for your current quest, the quest that you currently have selected. We may want to just see all of our quests that we have available. We may want to see the quest that we've completed or the quest that we have yet to get. And to do that, I'm going to make a menu. So we already have an inventory menu here, and this is something that we've done in other episodes that won't be required to do this quest episode. But this is what happens when I open my menu. I go to my inventory, and if I have items in here, I can equip them or unequip them. At this point, I have added another menu that I can toggle on and off and switch between by pressing the 3 button on my keyboard. And once I press that, I will go to the Quests tab. And the Quests tab here has all of my available quests as well as the description. So it's not just the current quest, it is a list of the quests that we have access to and the description of the quest here. We can do a lot more with this in the future, but getting this set up will allow us to organize these, sort these into things like story, side missions, or other, and will also allow us to sort them by the status. So if they're unlocked, in progress, or completed, or failed, we could mark them here and sort them by that as well. We can also hide ones that we don't have access to, although right now I'm showing them all. And we could put the description as well as some other stuff like rewards in here or number of objectives in here as well. So we can really customize this to our liking, and then when we're done we can either switch back to the inventory like this, or we can toggle off the menu. That's what we're going to be covering today. We're going to be going over creating the quest menu and being able to add it to the screen and make sure all the data is loading in properly. We'll do a lot more with this in the next episode on quests and the quest list, so don't worry, there is plenty to come. But before we get into this episode, if you want to get caught up on this series, if you like what you see in here, where we can play our game, equip weapons and items, attack opponents, then feel free to click this icon in the top right corner right here, which is a playlist for the entire series. So you can check out everything we've done to get to this point and how we've got this result. However, if you're just here for quests, that is also perfectly fine. These other tutorials aren't required for you to perform the quest system, but I would recommend that you watch the first episode of the quest system within this project, as we are going to be building on top of that logic today, and it will be helpful. I also want to give a huge shout out to my YouTube membership and Patreon members and supporters. Thank you guys for all the love and support. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate you giving me ideas to work on for these series, so thank you for letting me know what you guys want to see. With all that said, we can go ahead and get started. Now this is a C++ and Blueprint tutorial, but today we're only going to be working in the blueprints because we're just going to be setting up the actual quest menu widget, and we will go from there. So first things first, we're going to need 2 more widgets. I'm going to make one called Quest Menu and one called Quest Menu Item. So if you go to where you want these widgets to be created, you can press Add and go to User Interface Widget Blueprint. If you're in Unreal Engine 5, you'll have another pop-up here, but we can use the standard user widget. If you're in Unreal Engine 4, it will automatically create the widget of this type when you press that first button, so you don't have to worry. But otherwise, just press that button there and you'll get your widget. Then, like I said, I named mine Quest Menu and Quest Menu Item, but it doesn't really matter what you call them. This is just for your reference. Now, I will go into Quest Menu and Quest Menu Item. So Quest Menu is the actual screen that I want to pop up. It's the same as our inventory, where it is just a slightly transparent background, and then all of our items in the actual canvas panel here. So we will be making this nicer and neater in the future, but by all means, go ahead and organize this and make it look the way you want, especially if you have nice assets for this or menus in general. You can do a lot with this menu. The quest list is done a ton of different ways in different games, so you have all the freedom you could ask for here. And so what I've decided to do is have a canvas panel here that holds all of my elements. If you're in Unreal Engine 4, the canvas panel will come by default, but if you're in Unreal Engine 5, it will not. So if you want to add one, you can just search in the palette for the canvas panel, and then just drag it into the root element here, which is the name of the widget. Or you can find it under panel and just drag it in. So once I have my canvas panel here, this is essentially the room I have to work with. I haven't changed anything on it, so here are my settings, but it's just the default canvas panel, nothing special. Now I've started putting titles on my menus because before we had the inventory window and we had no title here, which is perfectly fine because it was the only widget that we had that we could access in the game like that. But now since we're going to be able to switch between them, and it's good to know what is what, so I went ahead and added a title to my inventory window as well as a title to my quest menu now. And all this is a piece of text that I brought into the canvas panel. I've called it quest title text. Here are my settings for it. You can see I've anchored it to the top middle, moved it down a few units. I have given it an alignment of 0.5 because when you anchor something, it is the top left of the element that goes to this anchor. So if you don't have 0.5 alignment, it's going to be slightly off center. I want it to be directly in the center. There's other ways to accomplish this as well. And I made the text box size to content so that it sizes to whatever the title is. Additionally, I've just given some outline size here to give it a nicer look and feel. None of this is required. This is just what I did for my title. If you do this, I recommend, if you are following the series, that you do add one to your inventory window as well for consistency. So you can actually copy this and paste it in your inventory window and just rename it and change the text if you want, but that's up to you. You can see I've done that, and all of my settings are here, so feel free to use them if you'd like, or make your own little text widget. But there we go. So now the text on the inventory and the quest matches. The other thing I did that is really just a visual is the background. So I'm actually move this up here. So I have an image that I brought onto the canvas panel as well that I've called quests background, and I've anchored it to be the full size of the container, which is the canvas panel. So you can see it fully covers it. Here are my settings again. I've given it a Z order of -1, so it shows behind the other elements on the canvas panel. And then I don't have an actual background image as of yet, but you can draw a tint or give it a color. And I gave it an alpha of 0.2, so basically it's just this transparent white background, which makes it look a little gray. And here are the rest of my settings. And there we go. So those are the visual changes that I made. The actual important parts that we need to have for today's episode are this quest vertical box, or quest VB, and quest description. So, vertical box. You've seen these before if you've followed the series, but a vertical box is literally just a container that holds elements in vertical fashion. So, you'll notice when we go into our quest menu here, I have the first quest here, second quest right below it, third quest right below that. They are stored in a vertical box, so each entry is below the previous. And so we need a vertical box that you can also grab from the panel section. Right here, vertical box. Or again, you can just search for it. I typically just search for them. And you can just drag it onto the screen. Now I have positioned it in a particular spot just so that it's below my title, but really it doesn't matter where you put this. Just as long as you can test that the quest data is being loaded properly, we will always be able to modify this later. So here's my quest vertical box. It does need to be a variable because I'm going to need to access it in the graph. But I don't have changes on any of the other details in the vertical box, except for the position and the anchoring. So you can choose to put it wherever you want. Mine is anchored to top left. And here are my positions. Again, this is just a visual thing, so it's not important that you copy these details, but we do need a vertical box that is a variable. Now I've also added another text box right here to the canvas panel, and I've called this the quest description. And I've also made this a variable. One final time, here are my positions for everything. I have written out some default template text of what the description could look like. So I have the description of the quest and all required components, And then we're going to list the rewards and potentially the objectives in here in the future. So I just set up a little template for that where it's rewards, and then, you know, we could put whatever. One time gold bag, right? We can put whatever we want in here. Here are my settings for the text. And I do have the auto wrap text enabled, that way when it gets to the end of the line, instead of going over the bounds of this text box, it will then wrap to the next line. Alright, and that is the quest menu setup. It's very basic right now, but this is all we actually need to test out all of our behavior. Before we go into the logic for that, let's go into the quest menu item. So if you haven't already, make a new widget blueprint, and I call this one quest menu item. Now this one is very simple. This is the actual individual element that we're going to add to the vertical box. And really we want to make one for every quest that the user can currently see. The design on this is very, very simple. So we have our parent element, which is our widget. Then I have a canvas panel in here, but it's not required for this one at all. If you're in Unreal Engine 4, the canvas panel will be included by default. If you're in Unreal Engine 5, it won't be, but since we are adding these to a vertical box, it's not required that you put them in a canvas panel, but putting them in doesn't hurt anything, so feel free to do it like I have here. Here are my options for my canvas panel, all default. Then I've added a button to that canvas panel, right here in common. And this button is going to be what we spawn and add to the vertical box. So here are my settings for that. Nothing has changed, all default values. I'm just using a button as a way of storing this text. Instead of just putting the text out there in a blank image, the button can act as a background, and you can also add a style on the button to make it look way nicer. So I've added text to the button, which you can do by dragging the text onto the button. I can't do it because I've already got one, and you can only have one child on the button. But once you do that, you'll get this little text entry, and I've called it the quest entry text, which is a variable. You'll notice the quest entry button is also a variable, but it's not required that it is. It could be good for something like changing the style on the fly in the future, so I'm going to leave it as a variable even though we're not going to use it today. Now going back to the text, you can see here are all my values for it. So they're mostly all the default stuff. I do have text here that is bound to a specific value, so I've given it a default name of just quest name, the adventure begins, but that's not a real quest that I have. We're going to bind the text on each button to the corresponding quest that it represents. So it's going to take the name of the quest and display it on this button. We'll get into this in just about a minute. But here are the remaining details for my text. So there you go. Now you have the quest menu and the quest menu item, which are the two widgets that we need to create for today. Now let's actually go into the graph of the quest menu item first because it's very simple and very quick. So if we go into the graph, you'll notice if I go into my event graph, I don't have anything in here. That's right, we don't need anything in the event graph. I've even removed the 3 default events that are in here. It is completely blank. But I do have a function in here, which is actually a binding, and it's that binding for the text that we had mentioned earlier. So what you should do is click on the quest entry text, or the text that is on your button, go down to content text, hit the bind option, and create a binding. When you do this, it will automatically create a function and bring you into it called get quest entry text underscore 0. I thought that's a pretty ugly name, so I renamed it to just get quest entry text, which you can do by right clicking on the function and pressing rename. Now, in here, you're going to have the initial node for the function, or for the binding, and then you're going to have a return node. And essentially, whatever we return, or whatever we put into this return node, is going to be what displays as the text on that button. And so it's pretty simple. What we want to put as the text for the button is the title of the quest, but we don't have access to the title of the quest at the current time. So what we want to do for this is actually grab the text value and any other values we may need. So for right now, I only need the name of the quest. but we very well may need things in the future. So I'm going to track the entire quest data for the quest that this button is representing, or this quest menu item is representing. And to do that, I'm going to make a new variable by pressing the plus variable here. I'm calling it quest reference, and I'm setting it to be a variable type of quest, which is a structure, an fquest structure that I have in the code in our base quest.h. So we have this fquest structure, and we even have a data table that actually fills out all this data. But this is the type that the variable is going to be. So fquest, or just quest, is how it shows up in the variable type. And then you'll see I've also checked instance editable and expose on spawn. These two booleans will allow us to actually pass data into it as soon as it's created and edit that data. So we can pass in the quest that this relates to, this quest menu item relates to, when we spawn it, and then it will automatically have the quest data, such as the name, so that we can immediately display that on the button here when we open the window. And so what we want to do is grab our quest reference, and we want to get it. Then we want to drag off of it and break it. And then you can see all of the variables that the quest reference has. Now, since I only need the name for now, I've unchecked the pins I don't need just to make this a little bit cleaner. But you don't have to do that. You can leave them all in. It doesn't really hurt anything. I just think it's a little bit neater like this. Now you can drag the name directly into the return node, and you will get this toText string, which is what we want because the text uses the text variable type, but the name in our quest is a type of string, so we need to convert it from string to text. If for whatever reason that's not working, you can always drag off of your string and type toText and select toText string manually, then pass that into the return node. And this is the quest menu item complete, so we don't have to do anything else with this widget today. Now what we need to do is go into the quest menu widget. Let's go back into here, and let's go into the graph for this one. Now the graph for this isn't too large, but it is a little bit more complicated than the quest menu item. In today's episode specifically, I'm going to keep it really simple. I'm not going to worry about quest status, or if the player or character has unlocked the quest yet. We're going to display all quests on this menu on this list. And by all quests, I mean all quests that are in the data table that we set up. I have a data table called quest data table. And here are my 3 quests that I've set up so far. We have getting started part 2, and learning the basics. These are things that I've already set up in other episodes of the quest system, so you don't have to change anything today. Just showing you these are where the quests are coming from. So all of these are currently going to be shown on the menu, and this checks out because you saw that there were 3 quests shown in the list when I was playing the game. Now going back to the quest menu, what we're going to do is grab all the elements from that data table and add them to the vertical box by creating a quest menu item and assigning each one of these quest menu items to one of those quests to store that data for us. So in event construct of our quest menu, you'll have this automatically when you go into the graph, but if you deleted it for any reason, you can always type event construct and get it back. This will fire when the widget is created. On event construct, we want to get all of the data table row names and loop through them. That way we can grab each one individually. So we can get data table row names, and it's going to ask you for a data table. You can manually pick the quest data table. That's the only one we'll be using for this widget. So it is fine to manually select that. Then you have out row names, which is an array, and this is going to be the names of each row. In a data table, the row name has its own column, which I typically just use as an index of 0, 1, and 2. That way I can easily loop through them, but however you handle it is perfectly fine. And so if I drag off of my out row names, I can do a for each loop. I can then search for another function called get data table row. then it is going to ask for a data table. We want to pick the same one, which is our quest data table. And for the row name, instead of manually picking, we can pass the array element from the for loop into the row name. Then on loop body, if the row is found, basically if this row exists, then we can actually create a quest menu item. So we can do create widget. And for the widget, we know it's going to be quest menu item. That other one that we created earlier in the episode. All right. Now at this point, you can see I've done this all below already. But at this point, you'll see that on here we have owning player and quest reference. You can assign the owning player to the player controller if you'd like. We are going to be doing this in the future. I'm not going to worry about it right now because the next episode is going to be on the quest list navigation, and so it'll make more sense to do it there because we're going to talk about how to actually move between them with the keyboard and what we can do on the quest menu. So I'm ignoring that for now. And below that is the quest reference. This is the variable we set up in the quest menu item right here. That's what actually is used in our binding. So we need to make sure we pass something into the quest reference. Now, for me, I'm going to pass in the entire out row. This out row is the structure that is returned from the data table row. This structure that is used in the data table is the fQuest structure. So literally, we can just plug in the result found from the data table at that row into the quest reference and be good to go. All right, and that's how I've done all of this right here. Now, the last thing we need to do after setting the data in the quest menu item is adding this data to the vertical box. So our quest vertical box should be a variable. And that's what we added here. It's sized to content, so it's super tiny. You can't really see it. You can only see it when things are inside of it. And we're going to add our quest menu items to it. So let's grab our quest vertical box and get it. And then let's search for add child to vertical box. Now all we have to do is pass along the content that we want to add. And what we want to add is the return value from the created quest menu item widget that we just made. Drag that into the content and you're good to go. Now this is everything we need to do in the loop. For every row, we need to create a quest menu item widget and we need to add it to the vertical box. After the loop is completed, we have some other things we need to do. So if you go back to your for each loop, you can go completed, drag off of that, and then we can get the data from a specific row, just like we did above. So we can do get data table row. We're going to pick our quest data again. And I'm going to default it to 0 this time because this is our initial entry and this is the one that I want to display the quest description for. So we were trying to set the description of the text in this box. If we don't do this, I'll show you what it looks like. So when I open my quest menu, you see that the description here is the default description that was on the widget. The description of the quest and all required components. Rewards 1x gold bag. But when I do put this logic in, it should read the description of the first quest that we have. Learn the basics and complete your first quest. This is what it should say in the data table for the description of the getting started quest. And it does. So that's what we're doing. We're just setting it to the default value. Since we can't really navigate through this quest list widget yet, we're not going to be able to get the description of every quest. But that's coming in the very near future. It's going to work the same way that we have our inventory system working, where we can actually manually scroll down between the elements in our inventory. And so after we have gotten the data table row for row 0, or our default value, we can then drag off of the out row and type break and break the quest. At this point, all we need is the description, so I've toggled off all the other checkboxes and just left the description. Now, I grab my text box, my quest description, which is a variable, get it, and call the function setTextText. I know it is a funny one, but that's what it's called. And we want to set the actual text of this text box widget. So to do that, we can drag the description directly into it, and it will convert it just like we saw on the binding. And so that's what I've got for all this logic. That's what this does. Just takes the description that we have for the quest at the current row, and then sets the quest description variable and text widget to display that text. Now I have some other logic in here, and this logic is just specifically for closing the widget and switching between the inventory menu and the quest menu. So if you don't have the inventory menu, or you're not worried about this right now, you can actually skip this portion. But I would recommend putting it in if you have the inventory menu, because we are going to be using it in the future. We're going to clean it up a little bit so it's nicer to use, but we are going to be using it in the future to switch between our pause menu or just menu widgets in general. So essentially, just like in our inventory window, I'm going to listen for certain actions or certain input actions, so that when a player presses an input, if that is found to be pressed while the menu is open, we perform an action. In this case, I want a way to return from this menu, or basically exit the menu. And I want one to toggle between this menu and another menu, like the inventory menu. So if I add 2 function calls to listen for input action, then I can type in the action name that I want to use to, let's do the close the menu first. So I have an action name called menu back, and if you've been following the series, you will too. But if you haven't, it's very simple. Go to your edit, project settings, scroll down to input, and then add an action mapping that holds the button that you want to be used for exiting this menu. I have one that I've called menu back, and it's just the Z key on my keyboard, because it really doesn't matter what it is. That's just what I happen to make it. We have to make sure that the action name lines up perfectly, so make sure it's the same capitalization and everything. The event type of pressed is fine. This just means that once you press that key on the keyboard or press that button down on a controller, it will fire this event. And when it does, whatever's in the callback will actually trigger. So you can drag off your callback and type add custom event, and you'll get an event here which you can name. Now I've already done this, and I've called that event return from menu, but you could call it whatever. You could call it exit menu. Doesn't really matter. And all I do in that logic, in this event, is just remove it from the parent. I just remove the quest widget. The quest widget doesn't really have any other bindings to anything else right now, so just removing it from the screen is good enough. And what it looks like is this. If I press the Z key, it goes away from the screen and then go back to everything being normal. So you can just call remove from parent. Alright, now the other listen for input action, this is the same node. I have the action name target lock on, which I have in here. This is what I actually use to lock on to targets in the game, so you don't have to use this. I just use this because I like the 3 key being the one to change between menu items, and this is because my open close menu, which is what I use to open my inventory menu, is the 2 key. So they're right next to each other. It's easy for me to remember. But you can make another action mapping or use any of the ones you currently have. But remember, the one I'm using is target lock on, and it is the 3 key. So I want to put target lock on in the action name, leave the event type as pressed, and then on the callback I have an event that I've called switch to inventory menu. Now this event is a little bit more involved, mainly because the inventory menu is actually created from the base character blueprint. So we have this open close menu, that is my 2 key. So when I press the 2 key, this event is called. It checks to see if we're currently dead or not, and if we are not dead, it was checking to see if the inventory reference was valid or not. Basically, is the inventory menu open or not? If it's not open, it was opening it. So it was just going straight to this logic right here. But that's not going to really work anymore with the current logic. We're going to clean this up in the next episode, but I didn't want to do a whole big thing on it now because it's pretty involved. So you see how ugly this is? That's because these 4 nodes we're going to add between is not valid and creating the inventory window widget. So I'm going to move this over and I'm going to put this in. If you've been following the series, again, you should have this for your inventory menu, or for your base character BP, I should say. So it's not anything that you don't have. We are just going to add a few nodes here to clean it up and make it usable without causing issues with the quest menu, and also allowing us to use the same behavior we were already using for the inventory menu. All right, so let's take a look at this now. So open close menu, if we're not dead, we look to see if the inventory menu reference is not valid. It's not valid by default because it's not on the screen by default. So if it's not valid, I'm checking to see if there are any quest menus on the screen and just automatically removing them. Again, this is more of a hacky solution. We will go over the true solution and how we should handle this in the next episode, but this is way quicker than what we're going to do to cover this in the next episode. So for now, this will work in place of that. If the inventory menu reference is not valid and we are going to create an inventory menu reference, we don't want to create it over the quest menu. So for example, if I'm in my quest menu and I press the button to open inventory, right now the inventory menu is not open. So trying to open the inventory actually would work, but we don't want them to stack on top of each other. So when I press the button, I'm actually just going to switch back to the inventory menu instead. So what I'm going to do is call get all widgets of class, and we want to manually pass in our quest menu widget. And so I am then going to drag off of the found widgets, type get a copy. Index 0 is fine, because that is the first one, and that should be the only one. Then we want to see if it's valid. So basically, if there is a quest menu widget that is on the screen, then we want to remove it. So I'm going to call remove from parent. And we're going to pass in the index that we got from the get, or the value that we got from the get node at index 0. Then we're going to go about creating our inventory window widget. All of this is the same behavior as we had before. We're just making sure we remove the quest menu beforehand. Important to note that the is not valid also should create the inventory window widget, because even if the inventory menu is not currently up, that doesn't mean a quest menu is up. It could just mean no widget is up. So if it's not valid, we still want to create the inventory window widget. Now there's one other thing we're going to need to do here, but I'll cover that in a few minutes. So now let's go back to our quest menu. Now in the quest menu, what we essentially have to do is set that inventory menu reference variable. That way the character BP can properly track if the menu is open or not. And to do this, I am going to get the owning player pawn of the quest menu widget. Get owning player pawn. Really what this is the character that owns this widget. And so the default controller that we have in the series is just player controller 0, which is controlling our assassin character. That is the character that owns this. So we're going to cast that to our base character BP so that any character that is playable will be able to be the owning player pawn. Then, if this succeeds, we know that we have the ability to open the inventory window. We want to create the inventory window widget like we were doing in the base character blueprint, but we don't really have to do all that stuff we were doing. It's much simpler in here since we're already in a widget. So we can just call create widget, select the inventory window widget. And what we'll want to do is actually drag off the base character blueprint and call set inventory menu reference. Then we can pass along the return value from the created widget into that variable. And so the base character blueprint will have the proper value for the inventory menu reference. After that, we'll want to drag off the return value again and make sure we do add it to the viewport. And then we want to remove the quest menu from the parent. And there you go. That is the logic we have in here when we go to switch between the quest menu back to the inventory menu. All right, now let's go to the inventory window and finalize our logic. So go to this widget, go to the graph, and everything in the graph is good, except for we're going to add a listen for input action. So the last one we had before in the series was the return from menu, which is what was closing the inventory menu. But now we want to be able to switch to the quest menu. So to do this, we need another listen for input action. And you'll notice I'm using the same one that I was using to switch to the inventory tab when I was on the quest menu. So basically my target lock-on button is just the switch between quest menu and inventory window, but you can use whatever buttons you want. So I'm using target lock-on for my action name and type of pressed, and then I have an event called switch to quest menu. Now switch to quest menu isn't quite as complicated as the switch to inventory menu at the current time. So all we want to do to switch to the quest menu is create the widget. So create widget, and we select our quest menu. Then we can add it directly to the viewport. After doing this, what we want to do is close the inventory menu. But the inventory menu isn't as simple as the quest menu where we actually just remove it from the parent. We do want to call our base character BP function that we have to close the inventory menu because it also resets the reference here. Now, before in the series, this close inventory menu was going right into here. That was just a silly thing for me because really the close inventory menu shouldn't be using something that hasn't been executed. Like you see the close inventory menu is not going through this validated git node. So this reference very well could be invalid. We don't want to do that. So you'll see that I've done this instead. It's one small change, but it makes a big difference because if it's not valid at this point, then we could remove it from the parent. But then I realized, well, if we're doing that, then we don't even need this event. Like we could just call open close menu. But this is an input action. It's not an event that we can just call. We have to press a button to trigger it. So instead, I was going to put it here at the start and just change the name from close inventory menu to toggle inventory menu. Okay, so I just removed the close inventory menu that was plugged into these last two nodes and just put it at the start of the event as well. And so we can manually call it. And now at this point, if we go back to our inventory window, you'll see that everywhere close inventory menu is used, it will now be called toggle inventory menu. We are going to do that here as well because we want to make sure that we can actually toggle it off when we're switching to the quest menu. And to get this to work, we are just going to get our owning player pawn and cast it to our base character blueprint like we did before. And this time we are going to call the toggle inventory menu event. And once we do that, you will get the final result that we have in the tutorial here. So I can go into my game and I can open up the inventory, even if there's stuff in it. See, I have my basic sword. I can switch to my quest menu. My buttons should populate in my vertical box with the names of the quests. The description of the first quest should show up on the right here, and I should be able to close the quest menu or go back to the inventory and close from there. If all that's working, then you're good to go, and we'll get into more advanced stuff with the quest list in the next episode. But anyway, guys, I hope that helped you create a quest list of your own, and I hope you're excited for what's to come. If you are, please subscribe. There's new videos every single week, and I'd love to have you around for the journey. I want to give another shout out to my YouTube membership and Patreon members and supporters. Thank you guys for all the love and support. I really appreciate all you do, and it helps me a ton with the series and keeping the series alive, so thank you for all that you do. If you had any issues with this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. It's completely free and it is in the description, so you can check it out. Other than that, guys, that's all I've got, so thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.